Hello ladies and gentlemen, this is Blue Maxima, and today on episode 1137 of games that are trying to copy another game but doing it worse, it's GetsuFumaDen, Undying Moon, which is very, very clearly a copy of Dead Cells, but just not very good. Hi, I forgot to point this out at the beginning of the video, but this is a review copy. And that's a shame, really, because the game at least looks interesting. It has a very unique art style based on ancient Japanese art. Well, it's not that ancient, it's like a few hundred years old, I believe. And it has a lot of potential, basically being a Japanese take on Dead Cells. You never know what way they're going to change it up. But the problem is that they just don't change it up in any really meaningful ways. It works the same as most Dead Cells-ish titles, where you have a series of resources that you pick up on every one, and you use some of them to upgrade your abilities, to get yourself more abilities, to basically just make it so that you have an easier time surviving the next run. But if you die, you lose all those resources, so you have to decide whether or not you want to carry them back to the hub world at the end of every boss fight, or if you want to press on, risking all of those valuable resources. They do add a couple of other things, like they of course have unlockable weapons that you can find blueprints for throughout the game, but they work the same way as the upgrade materials, to the point where if you die you lose them, and I absolutely hate that system from Dead Cells, so I didn't like it here either. But anyway, you have that, but you also have the ability to upgrade weapons using upgrade materials found throughout the levels. They'll actually permanently upgrade that entire weapon type, which is kind of a nice touch. The problem is that a lot of weapons in this game, and in fact a lot of the basic mechanics in this game, just aren't that pleasant. It's honestly, just moving around and jumping on its own is just kind of unpleasant when you're playing throughout the game. It feels kind of stiff, especially when you're double jumping. The secondary jump is just so minor that it feels almost pointless. You might as well just make the single jump have that tiny little bit more height. It's not satisfying to play or control, and same thing with the weapon attacks, although I will admit these are better than just the general movement, because they just have these big flashy animations that just instantly create this hitbox, and it just feels a bit slam away at the button and just wait for the animations to play out. There's no real satisfaction in them. There's no real impact. There's no... Like, Dead Cells was infinitely better at this. The enemies felt like they really were reacting to your hits. The animations were quick, snappy, satisfying, and gave you a good idea of what the weapon was supposed to be. This just has some big, flashy animations covering up for the fact that they just don't feel very good to use. They just don't have that much in the way of precision or in the way of proper impact, and so as a result, just mashing buttons really feels like the best way to go about things. And there are extra mechanics on top of the combat in order to make up for this, like the status effects. If you manage to hit an enemy at the right time while they're attacking you, you'll get bonus damage and stun them. And if you manage to stun them enough times, you'll be able to do what's called a flash, which will not only do massive amounts of damage to the enemy, but it will also push back all of the enemies around you. And neither of these are particularly satisfying, just because the absolute base mechanics of the game just don't work particularly well, and as a result, it's just not that fun to control. And when you've got this sort of game, where you've got these tons of mechanics and these tons of upgrades that require a lot of resources to do, and you need to spend a lot of runs in order to get through them, therefore equaling a ton of time in the game, I just don't see myself playing this for longer than a couple of hours. I gave this 2 hours in order to impress me, which was about 3 runs, and I just found myself being completely uninterested in the way the base game itself handles. And that's just immensely disappointing to me, because it really does look good. The animations are great. The background stuff is really impressive. And some of these animations do actually look good. Like, don't get me wrong, like the fancy blade swinging animations that you get that show you where you're actually hitting, it looks really nice on video. Don't get me wrong, but It's just... It doesn't get backed up by the gameplay. So it might look nice, but it just doesn't help when you're immensely bored throughout the gameplay. But it might be better if the AI was even remotely a challenge, because the majority of the AI in this title is absolutely brain dead. Now, you do have the ability to unlock extra difficulties, and I don't know exactly what that would do to the enemies in question, but the enemies that you are going up against just in the regular game are really dumb. Their patterns are predictable. It's really easy to get them to attack one direction, dodge roll behind them, and then hit them from behind. They have just a very limited amount of attacks, and even 3 or 4 areas in, this pattern holds true. And as far as I can tell, this game is only something like 7 areas long. It can't be that much longer because of the way the levels are designed, and the fact that you're expected to beat the game in about 30 minutes. And of course, there are the upgrades, which will make everything just that little bit faster, but it's just really let down by something in particular. That being the level designs. Every single level in this game feels like the same labyrinth. You might have to go somewhere slightly different in the labyrinth. You might have to, for example, in the third world, you have to climb up to the top of both halves, destroy an object up there, and that's what lets you get onto the boss. But the first 2 levels are just wandering through these identical labyrinths with tons of turns, most of which only have an enemy or 2 at the end that aren't particularly fun or interesting to fight. And then you'll just need to go back through, try and find some chests in order to move on through. And they're incredibly boring. You'll spend multiple minutes going through these levels, and it'll feel like hours. Just because there's no diversity to these levels. There's no special things that can happen on each level. There's like 1 or 2 new enemies, but they're just as easy to defeat as the other ones. There's no secret areas. The most you'll find that's different from any of the setups before is a shop. And the shop will usually have items that are so expensive that you'll have no way to afford them during the level itself. You'll probably have to like get some kind of upgrade that'll let you carry along more money from a previous level in order to actually get anything done. And of course, it's immensely frustrating when you combine it with the Dead Cells upgrade tree, where it's like you have to upgrade a bunch of stuff in order to actually get those resources that you need in order to be able to afford stuff later on. So you'll be going away at the end of like the 2nd level, getting the resources, going back through the same repetitive BS, and it just doesn't work. It's so boring. Just the enemy AI being as dull as it is, the enemy, the level layouts being as dull as they are, and the base gameplay itself, the moment-to-moment swinging of your weapons, just the jumping being absolutely awful. And it's just got this overall stiffness to it, which games like Dead Cells just don't have. And of course, the way that they lay out the labyrinths is really boring on the eyes too, because while the backgrounds look great, and the enemy animations and the animations of the player as well, that's all great, don't get me wrong, it genuinely looks like a good game, but then you've got all this really boring layout of the labyrinth with just the floors and the ceilings all being identical to each other, and it just doesn't inspire any form of confidence in the game's just capabilities of making anything unique or interesting happen. It does kind of have this unique concept as well, where your healing potions are very limited. Like, to the point where you'll only be getting 1 as a result of actually, like, going through the stages. Because you'll usually find them in these stone tablets with the game's excuse for a story written on them, which is like a singular paragraph of text. And you'll just be reading that and thinking, okay, I have no idea who this person is. I have no idea what's going on. You get like 45 seconds of story at the beginning of the game, and then that's it. You're basically just Japanese dude wandering through Japanese nightmare, trying to take out Japanese legends and save the world. That's the entirety of the story that's been provided to me so far. Which is weird, because this is supposed to be a sequel to a Super Nintendo game that was supposedly really well received. There's a reason it's called GetsuFumaDen. It's because that's what it was called in Japan. The original iteration was, anyway. But anyway, back to what I was saying. So you have very limited health potions, and one of the ways they expect you to use the upgrade system is, you know, Gradius, where you pick up an upgrade and it moves along to the next part of the upgrade, like, slider, and you need to collect more in order to get the more powerful upgrades. This game does the same thing. You pick up these blue souls and then moves on to the next part of the upgrade, so you can get either main weapon damage, sub-weapon damage, extra health, or an extra potion. And frankly, I kind of hate that the system makes me making this choice, because eventually you'll get to the point where you're able to carry more potions in, and it just feels like it's trying to force you to waste upgrades in order to do your survivability, especially since you can upgrade your main weapon effectiveness with, like, 3 souls, or you can upgrade your health with 3 souls, only once, or you can spend 4 souls in order to get a potion, which will make the run last that little bit longer, but you'll be a little bit weaker on the upgrade cycle. And I don't like it. I genuinely don't like it. I hate that it makes me make that sort of choice, especially when you have to make that choice, like, not so much then and there, but if you come across another blue soul, it'll reset your upgrade tree and give you these weapon souls, which you use to upgrade your weapons as you're going through each run. So you have to make the choice basically right then and there, because if you accidentally pick up another blue soul without realizing it, it'll reset it, and you'll be like, oh, now I'm not going to be able to get that potion. Which will be a real pain in the ass. If you've got mostly full health, you've got 1 potion, and you're thinking to yourself, am I going to be able to make it through with what I have? And it also doesn't help that a bunch of the game just feels unpolished on top of all of that. Like, for example, this game was in early access for how long, and they still haven't figured out how to spell acquire? It's on, like, every bloody thing that you need to pick up, and they've just spelt it wrong this entire time. But there's a bunch of other things that happen as well, like items getting stuck in midair, and just attacks coming at you from off-screen, and a couple of other things that not only I have noticed while playing 2 hours of the game, but people who have way more playtime than me pointing out in the update notes that people have just been complaining about this for some time and nothing's been done. I will at least say that it runs fine. They didn't put a 1.0.0 release tag on something that runs awfully. I cranked all of the settings up to max, and the game seems to run absolutely fine. And it picked up my DualSense as soon as I plugged it in, but again, that's probably a Steam thing and not a game programming thing, although they do give you the option to change the buttons to the PlayStation set in the options menu, so, you know, that's absolutely fine. I can't argue with that. And what else do I have to say? It's just, it really is just Dead Cells, but worse. The melee combat just isn't that satisfying to play. The movement just isn't that great either. There is a tiny bit of satisfaction to be found in getting, like, a perfectly timed attack in on an enemy and knocking them back, but that's kind of just, it isn't really helped out by the fact that it just kind of feels like button mashing will serve you well in this sort of game in comparison to properly timing your attacks. I hate the upgrade system. I hate the way that it works like Dead Cells, because I didn't like it in Dead Cells either, so it just doesn't work here for me either. The enemy AI is genuinely brain dead, and it repeats the same attacks over and over again, making it so easy that the only time you're really going to be taking damage is when you come across an absolute bullshit enemy, like the tiny things in Stage 4, or the, or a couple of bosses that have, like, a bunch of really easily avoidable attacks, and then one absolutely bullshit unavoidable attack that you just have no way to guess is coming. Then you have just the level layouts being just incredibly dull and samey throughout the entire game. Just this really simple platforming challenge with enemies all throughout, all of which are really easy to beat, and it's just incredibly repetitive over and over and over again with no sort of special, you know, like special occasion or anything throughout. And of course, since it has the whole Dead Cells upgrade thing, you're meant to be playing this for hours upon hours on end. So the boring level designs, the boring AI, the fact that the upgrade system is forcing you to go through them over and over and over again or risk losing your upgrade resources, and just all of this, and the general not satisfying to use controls, all just build up on each other. And I usually try and give games somewhere around the realm of 3 hours, right? That's usually around the amount of time you'll need to see, like, the absolute basics, but 2 hours in and I was just done. I couldn't bring myself to play another boring, repetitive, resource grinding run in some attempt to see how this game might be kind of neat or special, but yeah, just 2 hours in and I'm done. And that's never the sort of recommendation you want to give to a game that's meant to be played for 20 hours at the very minimum. So yeah, there you go. With that said, I wouldn't recommend this game. If you like the look and concept of this game, doing repeated runs in order to earn upgrade materials, which will unlock things and let you get more powerful and tackle the stages over and over and over again, get Dead Cells. It's a more complete package. They've got more in it. As a matter of fact, some of the stuff that they were promising for the 1.00 release of this was pushed back because it looks like they're also trying to copy Dead Cells' release formula, where they release multiple post-launch updates in order to increase confidence in the game and to get more people to buy it, because they see all this post-launch content and think, oh, the game's got a fair bit more content than you think. It's at the point where they've left, like, weapon slots and character slots from that were planned for 1.00 just in the game. So yeah, I would not recommend GetsuFumaDen Undying Moon, if that wasn't blatantly obvious already. With that said, this has been Blue Maxima, and I will see you all next time.
Yeah.